Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Hey Pastor Jonas. Today we have a special guest, which is my teacher in seminary, Dr. Justin. Welcome, Dr. Justin.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me, Jonas. Pastor Jonas.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, you don't have to call me Pastor. Yeah. So Dr. Justin, would you introduce yourself and your ministry?
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me on. I'm very happy and honored to be a guest on your podcast. I appreciate this. My name is Justin. I am originally from Los Angeles, California, USA. I am a second generation Korean American, which means I was born and raised in the US, but my parents are originally from Korea. I am currently teaching systematic theology and a little bit of church history at Singapore Bible College, which is where Jonas, or Pastor Jonas, got his MDiv. I've been there since 2019, so this year is now my fifth year teaching at Singapore Bible College. And I think I've enjoyed my time here so far, and you can say that this work that I'm doing is also the ministry that I'm doing. And I will continue to be doing so as far as I'm aware for the foreseeable future. So this is what I am doing at the moment. Yeah.
So let me clear this to the audience, to my friends, right? Yeah. So if anyone ever asks me, like in seminary, like who is my favorite professor in school, I'm gonna totally say, oh, there's this guy Korean, but he's American, but it's complicated, but I always learn a lot of stuff, and that's Dr. Justin. I learned a lot from you, and interestingly, we sort of entered the Singapore Bible College, SBC, at the same time, but the difference is that you're the professor. At the time, you're like the youngest faculty member, if I'm not wrong. It's so funny how young you were, considering that you're the one who's teaching. And because many of the SBC students mistaken you as one of the regular students when you were just walking around. But when you have the name tag on it, it shows otherwise, right? So, but Dr. Justin, just share to us how was that experience has been like for you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jonas. Being told that you are someone's favorite is always a very big compliment. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm sure you have other favorites as well, but I appreciate the compliment and I receive it with a very open heart. For me, it's been quite interesting. I'm not going to reveal my age here, but you can tell that I'm not very old. That's one thing that you can probably tell. And the way that I dress, the way that I carry myself is still kind of young. So even when I arrive, even now, sometimes there are people who are staffers or visitors or students who do mistake me for a student, which is fine. I mean, as long as I look young, that's a good thing for me, right? I think for me coming in, I knew that I was young. I was the youngest lecturer at the time at Singapore Bible College, and I think now, as far as someone who has a PhD, I still am. The funny thing is that even though this is my fifth year at SBC, in the beginning of this school year, the principal mistakenly introduced me as the most recent lecturer, which is not true at all. I'm actually kind of middle in SOTE now in our English department. I'm right in the middle now. But then some people thought that I just arrived. Like, no, I've been here for 5 years. I've been here for long enough that I know what's going on. But when Jonas started at SBC, we were part of the same cohort, you can say, the same class. In fact, he arrived before I did because I got there a little bit late because I was finishing up my school year when I was teaching in Germany. And so he actually was there longer than I was. So him and his class, they're all there before me. So they had more experience and more knowledge. But I think for me, I'm from the US. I'm from California, which is a very chill kind of place, which means I don't really take myself too seriously. And I don't think too highly of myself, which means that I don't mind, kind of just being one of the guys as well. But when it's time to teach, you have to do a good job, right? If I don't do a good job, that means that well, what is this guy doing here? But with our school, we have people from lots of different ages. We have people as young as their mid 20s, all the way up until their 60 plus students. So we have this really big range of students, which means that someone who looks like me is going to be teaching a lot of people who are older than myself. So it's just part of the experience of being here. But I think it's been fine. I think as long as you are open, as you're friendly, for me, I'm always willing to listen to and learn from other people. It's overall been a good experience. I don't think anyone's treated me badly because they think I'm younger, but I have been, sometimes people say, oh, I thought you were a student. Like one time I remember I was out for a holiday party or something, and I came back to campus late, and our campus has a curfew where they lock the gate after a certain time. And one time I got back late and I was like, oh, I have to rush back. But I got back, and then the security guard uncle, he scolded me saying, this time I'll let you in, but next time, oh, no, you're not going to get let. And I was like, no, I'm a lecturer. And he's like, no, this time, I only give you a chance this time. And I was like, well, I guess it's a good thing. So overall, I think the experience has been fine. I haven't really had any pushback as a result. No one's really challenged me in class because I'm young. I think I show that I know something that maybe that they don't know, which sort of helps a little bit. But I think part of it has also to do with a bit of confidence. Again, not taking yourself too seriously, things like that. But overall, it's been not a bad experience. But it also makes me more relatable, right? So one thing that I know that Jonas likes in my teaching is that I often will use memes in my teaching, just to kind of have a light joke here and there, or I'll have more relevant examples that I know younger people are talking about. So when younger people come to class, they tend to resonate with the material more. So in some sense, actually, it helps to prepare me to kind of minister in some sense to the younger students and the younger generation students a bit more.
It also helps me to embrace all these memes because for me, coming from a more Chinese traditional church, that is something like a uncharted area, like unorthodox to use memes. Back in my time when I was young, right? Memes weren't really that popular back then.
Yeah, they didn't really exist.
People didn't know how to use memes.
Yeah.
I'll probably pronounce it as meme back then.
Nah, that's okay.
Yeah. So Dr. Justin, you and Petrus were like my introduction to the Asian Americans. So if you don't know who Petrus is, he's in one of my earlier interviews. You can check him out there. He's the Asian American guy who got stuck in Singapore. Well, same as you as well.
Same as all of us, actually. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. We get to spend a lot more times, during the holidays. We was like sit in one of the classrooms. We watch like movies right together because we can't go anywhere else. There's nothing else outside. We can't go out, hang out there. Outside is dangerous.
We had a few Disney Plus marathons together during COVID.
Yeah. Back then when the shows are still good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I always cherish those moments. Yeah. So again, but those were times, those were periods when there's a lot of Asian Americans movie came out, and it was a really good time for me to really expose to what really means by Asian American, because I'm not just experiencing it from movies, but I get to know a little bit deeper the problems, the culture problems that wasn't shown in movies. Now I just want to ask, like, now you're in Singapore. This Singapore was like this window door between this Western world with the Asian world, where cultures meet and blended in. Can I say in a nice way? I guess. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So now, having stayed here more than like 5 years, like, what's your thought on this whole journey? Because I could still remember on one of the conversation we had, is that you said that you felt like you don't really belong anywhere because you're not American enough, you're not Korean enough, but now you're in this Singapore. And now, what was that like? Because that really hits me, because I couldn't really imagine like what that's like.
Yeah, sure. So if I was to explain a bit of my own experience and background, growing up in the United States is an interesting experience. I grew up in a time when there were less Asians overall. I mean, there are still a lot because I'm not that old, but in a time and in a place where there's a different attitude about what it means to be in America or to succeed in an American context. One of the things that is true of when people go to America is that there's this really strong sense of having to try to fit into that culture and to sort of blend in or to fit in into American society. And so when you go in as an immigrant, especially from a lesser place to a higher place, in terms of economics, money, whatever, you have to do your best to try to fit it. And if you're a first generation person and you're already grown up, obviously you'll never speak the language perfectly.
Yeah.
You'll never understand the culture perfectly. But if you're someone who's born there and you're raised there, you sort of do, right? Because you're part of that. You grew up with that. The TV you watched growing up is that. The education system that you lived in was always part of that. So the immigrant experience is quite different from the first and the second generations. Now, this is a little bit different from people like you, Jonas, or those who are listening. Maybe many of the people are Malaysian Chinese or Singaporean or something else like that. Typically Chinese, which means that your ancestors at some point, at least a couple generations up, have migrated to where you live and have built pockets of, communities where people live together and so forth, which, results in something a little bit different than, say, what they look like when they're in their home country, but is still in some sense carrying on the sort of feeling and legacy and values of that culture. The thing about moving to a place like the US, though, is that it's different in the experience because of that feeling of that class difference, where to fit in, you have to try to become American. Whereas maybe for Chinese immigrants from mainland China to, say, East Malaysia or West Malaysia a couple of generations ago, the feeling was a little bit different. It's more of we're making a space for ourselves. We're trying to make a better lives. We're building our community here. But in America, the way that the power dynamic worked was a bit different. So when I was growing up, not just amongst me, but amongst other people that I grew up alongside, there was a sense of you have to fit in. You have to speak English. You shouldn't, you have to eat our food. So people like me going to school, there's white kids, there's other kinds of kids. There's something weird about me bringing Korean food. The white kids might look and say, oh, what is that weird food you're eating? And so kids like me, they tell their parents, they tell their mom, I want to eat sandwich. Don't pack me rice and in Korean banchan, right? The side dishes. I want a sandwich. At home, the parents will tell you, speak Korean, speak Chinese. And they say, no, I don't want to speak it, right? Because my friends all speak English. America speaks English. Why should I speak this language? So for me, growing up, I didn't like speaking Korean. I thought it was a strange thing. I wanted to speak English because I grew up in America and I thought of myself as American. But again, I'm still not fully, let's just say, white American in the way that American society is. So people who grew up like me kind of fit in this really weird in-between space. We think of ourselves as American, but to Americans, I'm Korean.
Yeah.
They say, oh, where are you? Where are you from? I say, I'm Korean. But if I go to Korea, I can't speak perfect Korean. I mean, I speak Korean okay, but I'm not perfect in Korean. I didn't grow up in that system. I'm not from there. They say, oh, you're American.
Yeah.
So what happens? A lot of people like me had this really weird experience going back to their home country where they realized, these people don't accept me. These people don't accept me. So where do I really fit? So it's a very odd and sometimes, destabilizing, confusing experience when you're not sure how to make sense of what your own identity is. And so a lot of people have that journey and realization in different ways. Some people say, I need to tap into my Koreanness more. I need to go to Korea. I need to spend time and live there. Because I have a lot of friends who, after they graduated, they went and they lived and they taught English in Korea for a while. And they sort of tried to kind of tap into that side of themselves. A lot of people actually find it in church because there's other people who are like you, who have the same experience. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone else. They understand what you're going through. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, across different nationalities, the experience is similar. So Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese Americans, they all have a very similar experience of a dislocation from one culture to another. And so this sort of Asian Americanness of, we have this experience and we've now come together because we have these similarities formed as a result of that kind of desire to express themselves and to sort of make sense of who they are and to kind of have a bit more power in this combined voice instead of just saying only Korean, only Chinese, only Vietnamese, and so forth. So that's kind of one of the major things of Asian Americans. So I mean, I'm curious, like, so what do you think about this? And just to turn the question on you, Jonas or Pastor Jonas, do you kind of understand what I mean by this? In your context, in your experience, is there anything that's kind of like this?
In my context, no, definitely not. It's totally different because for me, I grew up in Malaysia. We have this community of all speaking Chinese, right? And we do have a lot of people who Malaysian who speak English as well, who don't really like Chinese, grew up Chinese, but they don't really speak Chinese, speak English or their own Chinese dialect. It was very shocking for me when you say you don't really belong anywhere, even when you're at home. That sort of culture is somewhat unique itself. It's not somewhere you can find anywhere. So what is this culture at all as well? So where do you even belong in this world? I can't imagine like going through all of that. Yeah. So like even I'm looking now today's society, like even the American, how much they embrace Korean culture, and you don't really get to experience that because this is their own generation now. You grew up in a totally different world when you grew up. That you have to be American, but today even Americans want to be Korean. So that is how the pop culture
sort of it's yes and no. There are some people who are like that, but the majority of them are not exactly like that.
Okay.
Now we would say that a lot of people are exposed to it, but it doesn't mean that they understand it or are open to it. So there's this kind of weird unspoken power dynamic that's there. So I'll give you an example. I know several people like myself who are, say, second generation. Growing up, their parents didn't teach them Korean because they wanted them to fit in.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of an unusual thing to think about, but that was not that uncommon at that time, especially earlier than when I was growing up. But this experience actually is not unique to the US. There's, migrants all around the world, and anywhere where you have a sort of power imbalance, there is this kind of thing. I think Malaysia is a little bit different because say in East Malaysia, the kind of racial dynamic is a little bit different. But in West Malaysia, it can be a bit strongly skewed towards Malays, right? Because there's more of them and they have a bit more power.
Yeah.
But the Chinese communities are kind of firm enough and the differences are firm enough, and it's you are you, I'm me, we do our own thing, that they don't have to mesh together in exactly that same way. But then there's a little bit of a tension that exists in that context. But in other places, there is that kind of a thing, right? Where maybe say, these days, in a place like Korea, there's a lot more people going there to work. They're going there to live, to make money, because Korea, you make more money than in, say, a lot of Southeast Asia, right? So there's a lot of people who are going there to work. Say you go there to work, say you end up raising your family there, and you have kids, and the kids are going where to school? They have to go to Korean school.
Yeah.
But the kids at school are always going to pick on them because you're not Korean. You don't have a Korean name.
And you're different.
Yeah. And the kids will speak Korean very well because they grew up in school. But will they ever be Korean in the same way that their classmates are, given that for Korea to actually become a Korean citizen, you have to take on a Korean name and so forth. So these kind of dynamics are true in Western countries especially, but also in countries where like there's that class and money gap where the ones who have less have to then try to live up to the majority who have power over them in some kind of way. So it's not a unique experience. And even somewhere like Singapore, I mean, Singapore, you have, Chinese, Malays, Indians, and I guess there's enough coexistence, but imagine you come from somewhere like the Philippines or Myanmar, Thailand, somewhere like that, and say your parents are lower class people who came to work. Then what happens? You sort of fit in here, and in Singapore, it's a bit easy to integrate into society, but say you go back to your home country. Do you fit in that place anymore? Not exactly. It becomes a bit confusing. And for me, I'm not saying that I'm uncomfortable in America, but it's that while you're living in America, every so often you'll have little experiences that remind you, oh no, I'm still different, right? So the whole issue of where are you from? No, where are you really from? Like they'll ask you, oh, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from Irvine. My hometown's Irvine. And they go, no, where are you really from? Even seemingly harmless question like that is a reminder in your everyday life that I'm from here, I grew up here, but some people will never fully accept that I'm from here. That's what I mean by that. Not that you're not comfortable, not that you don't have friends, not that you don't have community. So that's a complicated thing. Now, should I take this in a theological direction?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think? Okay, so one of the interesting things, one interesting theme from Asian American theology that those who are listening might, if you're interested in theology, you might be confused. Oh, what is Asian American theology? There is such a thing. One interesting theme in Asian American theology that is developed by this Korean American theologian named Sang-hyuk Lee is called liminality. And what liminality means is that you're sort of in this in-between space, neither this nor that. Now, a lot of people will think of liminality as a disadvantage. Like if I'm in between, I'm not this, that means that I'm in a bad situation. But actually, it can be used in a positive way, where you can become a bridge between these different things. You know how to survive in this world. You know how to survive in this world.
Yeah.
The person in this world who most exemplifies this idea of liminality is actually Jesus.
Yeah.
Because Jesus is not from this world, but he is from this world. He's from another world, his father's world, we might say, and he comes into this world understanding that world, fully part of this world, but again, also not fully part of this world. And he uses his liminality, we might say, as a way of bridging together two peoples, two worlds that were separated from each other because of this thing that we call sin. So one thing that we recognize is this. Because we all have liminal spaces in our lives, places where we kind of don't fit in, where we're in between spaces, the more we actually understand liminality, the more we actually understand the heart of Jesus, the more we understand we study Jesus, the more we recognize how his experience of being in that in-between space actually speaks directly to those of us who feel like we don't belong in this world. Because Jesus himself went through lots of these kinds of experiences, right? A prophet has no honor in his hometown. His brothers and sisters and relatives also say bad things about him at times. His disciples reject him. His people whom he came to save, they reject him. So he's someone who really understands this idea. And it's funny how this thing, which we think of as a disadvantage, actually becomes a very key point that is used to bring about a lot more good in the bigger picture of salvation. So that's one interesting application of this background in a theological way.
And that's Dr. Justin for y'all. Yeah, so that's an amazing illustration. But back to the question, right? Like now you're having stayed in Singapore for more than 5 years. How what's that feel like?
So
yeah,
Singapore is a very interesting place.
Yeah,
because I would say, as a foreigner, as an Asian American living in Singapore, in some ways, it's actually the most comfortable. You might not expect it, but it is. Not because of the weather, because I'm a kind of big guy. I sweat a lot, so I'm always sweating. Not because of that, but in Singapore, it's the one place where I've lived or spent time where I don't actually have to think about my race or background all the time. It's not in the back of my mind. And that's because my face looks quite Chinese, right? Or East Asian generally, which means that nobody looks twice at me when I'm walking down the street. They assume that I'm from here. But then when I speak, they go, oh, he must not be from here. But because I have an American accent, there's an advantage.
Yeah.
Like it looks like a good thing. So I have all of the benefits of being one of the bigger group, but I also have the benefit of being a foreigner who in some sense is looked at as higher by regular people. Oh, this guy's from the US. Oh, this guy is, he's a teacher, these kinds of things. So in some sense, it's more comfortable than living in the US or even in a place like Korea, where on a day-to-day basis, I might be reminded of how I don't fit in. Here, I don't have to actually think about it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's actually a lot more comfortable, surprisingly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, not for me though.
Yeah. No, I mean, for someone like you, you fit in, your English is good, your Chinese is good. So you just go around and, someone down the line could say like, oh, maybe are you Malaysian? Are you not
Yeah.
Singaporean? But honestly, it's not even a big deal because so many people are originally from Malaysia anyways. Like you meet so many Singaporeans who maybe like became Singaporean, but they maybe were born in Malaysia or their parents came from Malaysia, something like that.
Yeah. So, I'll share this, like one of the stories. I think for me it's quite uncomfortable, because like Malaysia has always been looked down, kind of by most Singaporean. Yeah. So there was one time, it was during the pandemic, right? And I was having lunch after Sunday. I was doing my field education, which is I'm kind of like an intern. So some people don't really understand what the field education is, but it's
Intern
kind of
at a
like
church.
pastor, intern, something like that.
Yeah.
So after the church, I went to a mall to buy some stuff and also grab a lunch there. So I share a table with a uncle, and well, he can really tell that I'm Malaysian because I'm not sure because of my accent, I guess. We're speaking in Mandarin though, he can tell.
Yeah.
And he kind of said this, oh, because I wasn't able to go back to Malaysia, and he wouldn't be really understand what my job is, my calling is, right? So I couldn't really explain that.
Yeah.
So he was like, oh, you can't go back. I can sense that he's trying to comfort me. So he would say like, oh, well, luckily you're in Singapore because things in Malaysia are so much worse. And I was like, I wasn't able to go back to my family for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And I don't really care if I get hit by COVID or something. I just want to go back to my family.
Yeah.
My people in Malaysia aren't going like so well, but I just want to be there for them. I just want to be among them, like so much better than me locking in Singapore, right? Yeah. So the sense of like, okay, so
that's where that class and power difference is there. For me, it's not because I'm from the US and Singaporeans will look up to the US, but for Malaysia, there's a tendency to look down on Malaysia, which means that for you, there will be sometimes little moments that remind you of, actually, this is not home.
Yeah.
Like, their values are different. The way people think are different. Things like that. I mean, I get a little bit of that too, but not in like an aggressive way, not in a way that's like offensive, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. When you're mentioning this, like from the streets, right? Many people might not be able to tell, but I could kind of tell the vibe, the behavior, the way they wear, right? I could tell who is Malaysian, who is not.
Sure.
I could tell, like the way how Singaporeans wear, the way they walk. So much different.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's something that you would definitely have more experience with because you can identify people who are like yourself a bit more. But it just reminds us that these kinds of experiences are things that all of us have had at certain times in our lives. Not all like racial or national differences, but times and places where maybe we feel like we don't fit in, or that we feel like an outcast, we feel rejected, and trying to make sense of who we are in light of that difference, or in light of a majority people who are different than us, is something that all of us do go through. And I think that maybe a point that I'm trying to turn it back to is that this is something that God understands in Jesus. And maybe we can be reminded of that, especially for those of us who are having struggles trying to fit in, or struggles trying to find our place in worlds that maybe we feel aren't so kind to us. Yeah.
So Dr. Justin, so most of the SBC lectures, Singapore Bible College, if you haven't got it, are multicultural. And I think that really helps usher the needs of the students, where a lot of us are actually from like Southeast Asia, learning in Singapore, and to graduate, to go back to our home country, to minister the churches in our own context. And what I think is so powerful, what you guys are doing is that the lectures aren't like molding us to become like a second coming Dr. Justin, Dr. Sam, Dr. Jerry, or the great Dr. Andrew Spurgeon. Yeah, the interesting guy. But you guys are like learning from us as well. I find it that very interesting, and you push us to become like better self, and so that we can go back to minister our own people in our own context. So I just want to ask, like, has that been a clear goal? Is it like a clear consensus of all the across the all the lectures? Could you share a little bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I can say that it's a clear goal of everyone to try to do that, but I do know that all of our lecturers are quite, we value the multicultural, context of SBC. We like that we have students coming from all over. We're not trying to make everybody into one image or one idea. We want all of you to be the best versions of who you are supposed to be. So we have a mix of lecturers. We have a number who are, say, local Singaporeans, and we have others who come from different countries and backgrounds. I think right now, there's a few of us who are actually Asian Americans. So myself, Dr. Sam, we have Dr. Daniel An, who's another Korean American. Dr. Andrew's from India originally, but he's lived all over the place. So it's kind of hard to know what exactly he is now. And I can't remember who else there is, but we've had others who've come and gone. Like Dr. Brian is from America,
Dr. Jerry,
Dr. Rick, and so forth. Dr. Jerry, of course, who just left not so long ago. I do think that, though, that some of us who have a bit more of that multicultural experience are, I think, intentional in trying to point that out for others. And what I mean is that if you're someone who has a lot of experience living in different cultures and contexts, you gain a perspective that others don't have. So what I mean is this. Me growing up in the US, I spent a lot of time in Korean American Christian circles, okay? Korean American Christian circles. So Korean churches that are planted by my parents or grandparents' generation, and they're people like me who've grown up in these churches and are part of this world. And in any place, you will tend to spend a lot of time with people who are like yourself, right? That's the people you know the best. But sometimes actually, to better understand yourself, you have to go outside. Because if you only spend time inside, you don't see everything for what it is. You just assume it. Oh, it's like this, it's like this. Okay, that's how it is. But sometimes you have to step out to say, actually, why is this like this? What's going on inside here? But if you're from the outside and you don't know that group, you don't understand that group. So in the technical terms, in say, sociology, these things, we call these the emic and the etic perspective. The emic being the insider perspective, the etic being the outsider perspective. So one thing that all of us need to better understand where we're from is to know it intimately inside, but also to have seen it from the outside. So an example of this is like, for me, I'm from a Korean American church, which means that I've spent time in that Korean church context. So I understand what the feel of it is, what the goal of it is, what the sort of understandings are that are sort of implicit in that group. A white person who came in, even if they spent years going to this church, even if they actually spoke decent Korean, would never understand it in the same way because they didn't live in it in that same way. Oh. But also, because I'm from outside of it, I can see things in it that need sometimes fixing or that are problematic.
Yeah.
So someone like Jonas, who now has spent time in Singapore and spent time away from the church the Methodist church in Sabah, and has looked at the Singaporean church, now has a little bit different perspective because he knows his home church context, but now he sees how the Singaporeans have done things, and he's not saying that it's all good and perfect, but has seen that there's something different, and now looks at it with fresh eyes that say, oh, okay, I understand why. I can see the good things, and maybe I can see the bad things a little bit better and understand maybe why the things are the way they are. Yeah. So all of us need a little bit of that perspective to understand ourselves better. So for me, what I consider to be one of my goals in my teaching is to help our students not only understand, say, I mean, I don't teach Bible, but not only the Bible and say theology and history better, but I want our students to understand themselves better. Because the more you understand yourself, the more effective you can be to minister in your home context, right? You have to be able to come at it with sometimes critical lenses, not saying that critical lens means that you see everything badly, but to try to understand it for what it is. So, because we have people from all different backgrounds, many different countries, we always have 20 something countries represented at SBC. I can't say I understand everyone's situations.
Yeah.
But there's some things I know that are quite common, shared across everybody's backgrounds, right? There's certain issues that pop up in lots of different contexts. And I know for some churches, these issues are bigger than in other contexts. And for me, I try to point, the direction in that direction to help our students understand, how do I think about these issues better? How do I understand my situation better? How do I understand this as both theological, but also maybe a social issue, so that I can be more effective where I'm going? So for me, I think it's a very intentional thing. If someone like a Dr. Sam, he's an intercultural missiology teacher. So he's always trying to get people to understand the situation better. And I think many of us have very similar approaches and goals, even for some of the lecturers who are Singaporeans too. Yeah, actually, maybe I can ask you this question.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if this is something that you would want to talk about in like the podcast situation, but in what ways have you maybe grown or seen things differently in the time that you were away to the time you came back? Because you're still in the same church context, maybe in a different church, but the same context. In what ways maybe have you learned to see things better or differently before and after? Like what has changed in your perspective?
So we Methodists, we're having this annual conference, which we all gather to have this meeting to talk about. So we have all the pastors from all Sabah, and we're gonna we have this meeting, and we have time to actually share around. And I think one of the pastors actually asked last night, "Hey, what do you think Methodist is?" And I actually had this I did this assignment when I was in SBC, because I went to TTC to pick up that module to learn, and I was doing this assignment, and I interviewed our president, and we share about what's going on in the UK Methodist, right? So there's a survey saying that within maybe, if there's nothing changed to the church within the 5-10 years, maybe the UK Methodist would cease to exist. Yeah, because it's how it has been aging there. So I came to this conclusion that there is a lot of problems in the church. But I was saying that because we have this system, we have this whole structure there. And as Methodists, if we continue to emphasize that it is a denomination, it is a church, it is a structure, it will cease to exist as well if we don't look at this as a movement. And I think what John Wesley started the whole thing is not because he wanted to start a church, but he is starting a movement. And we see that movement that actually changed the whole world, the whole church. So I came to that conclusion about that Methodist is not a church, it is not a structure, it's not a denomination, it is a movement. If we emphasize that it is a movement, right, Methodism will survive through all of that.
Yeah, but I think your comments are quite interesting, because to be able to come to that conclusion, you've had to learn a bit about church history. You have to learn a bit about Methodism. So that's what you had to learn at SBC and TTC. As a millennial Christian, you are also, by virtue of your generation, which is the same as mine, we're both millennials, by the way, tend to be a bit more anti-structure, against the sort of formalism for the sake of formalism, structure for the sake of structure. That's part of our generational DNA. I think that's true across different cultures as well. And so those kinds of things help you to kind of tap into maybe what's more important in Methodism than the older ways, which were really big about making things ordered and structured in a time before when maybe there was a little bit more chaos in the way things were run. But to point things in the right direction is something that is a perspective that you can bring, that maybe a pastor who's been in the church for 20, 30 years, who doesn't who's so entrenched in that world isn't able to see because he's stuck in that world. Whereas you, as a younger pastor who's now seeing things differently, can bring this new perspective that actually some of the older ones might need to hear. So that's a good thing, right?
So when I was doing this assignment, I was thinking that, hey, this Methodist now today is slowly becoming the church that casts out John Wesley the time. And
Yes.
and I was saying that if John Wesley was in this period, he would have been like something like a rebellious guy
Yes.
who go against this Methodist, this whole because it's slowly becoming that becoming a structure, becoming a we call in Chinese we call 形式化. I'm not sure what's that in English. It's just everything goes by something. You have to do this by the law and everything. And I think John Wesley would have hated that. Yeah, if he is in this century. I said this before. Like, even if the denomination itself like died, I wouldn't be sad because Methodism lived on. It lived on in it bled, the whole DNA bled into baptism. Every church in the world. So
So the legacy of John Wesley is not primarily in the structures of Methodist denomination, but is in the heart of that heart religion revivalism of getting people to turn to God in a real, honest way, that sometimes a structure like Methodism becomes the same thing up. Because, you know, Wesley was working within an Anglican church that was very dry head religion. And he was preaching a gospel that really touched people's hearts and convicted them of sin and gave them passion for God in a time where that was lacking. And so that's the heart of what he's about, right? So in this time, isn't it true that not only with Methodism, but other groups as well, it's become about structure, about tradition for its own sake, but the heart of Wesley maybe needs to be revisited or rediscovered to keep his legacy going, as you're saying. Yeah, see? It's good perspective.
Thanks for concluding that better than I could.
Well, that's clarity is important in the work that I do. So.
I'm not saying that I'm against any of this, all right? But I still love this church. I love this denomination, what it brings.
But if you love it, you have to push it in the direction it needs to go instead of keeping it the way it was, safe, because that's what people are comfortable.
And that is the Methodism.
That's Methodism.
That's the spirit of that.
Yes. I agree. I'm not a Methodist, but I agree.
Okay. So this is now the fourth question. It's more personal question. Like, what is Dr. J's next big thing? Do you have like big plans or project next year or life goals?
I can't say that I have any big life goals that I can think about right now at the moment. This semester has been very interesting for me because I've been doing a lot of writing and a lot of presentations. So funnily enough, this semester at SBC, I didn't actually teach any SOTE students the whole semester, which is very unusual because usually I'm doing a lot of teaching. I was doing more, I was teaching like the counseling students and others. I had a CCM, like a non-credit course. I'm teaching THM stuff, but I didn't actually teach any SOTE students.
Oh, that's odd.
It is a bit odd. Yeah, it's a little bit odd. But the one thing that I did a lot of this semester was I did a lot of speaking and I did a lot of presentations. So I gave a lecture for our advanced studies department on the future of Asian theology. I gave a couple of conference papers at our SOTE conference, as well as another conference that was held at TTC in Church Fathers. And all of which has led to publication stuff. So I've been working a lot on my research and writing and publication stuff this semester, more so than compared to others. And funnily enough, too, this semester I've had a lot of interesting opportunities to meet very, interesting and important people in the bigger Christian world and to connect with people in a way that I think is, that might be God pointing me into bigger things, like, interesting connections to make that I will then, benefit from in the future. So that's kind of one interesting thing in my kind of work life at the moment, which I think I find interesting. So I'm curious as to what that will look like in the year to come. In terms of what I'm working on at the moment, I'm finishing up a couple of publications, or one publication right now I'm almost done with, but I'm also preparing to submit a proposal for a book that I'm working on the topic of Asian theology and Asian theological methodology. Basically, how do you think about theology in an Asian context? So I have a few chapters that are already written, but I'm planning on sending out my proposal relatively soon. And I think that in the next year, I'll spend a lot of time working on that book. And assuming I finish it quickly, then hopefully it'll come out faster than never, right? So that's one of the big things I'll be working on immediately. But our break is coming up soon, so our semester is finishing. So I'll be traveling a bit. I'll be visiting Cambodia for the first time to visit a school there. Our alumna Vanna teaches there, so I'll be maybe teaching a class with them next year.
Did she invite you?
Kind of. I reached out to her, and then she's like, "Oh, why don't you come teach a class?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe." And then so I'm going to visit them, and then my parents actually happen to be visiting in December, so I'll be meeting them in Taiwan first. We'll be spending a few days in KL, and then we'll be hanging out in Singapore for about a week. So it's their first time to this part of the world. So I'm looking forward to spending time with my parents because they're getting older, but they're still quite active and mobile. So I want to show them all the nice things and spend time with them because I live far away, so it's not very often that I get to spend a lot of time with them.
So there you have it, Dr. Justin. From the way he speaks, right, you can tell he's a podcast veteran because you're a natural speaker. You're good at stuff on the stage or on podcasts. You're natural, even with this Zoom interviews.
Yeah. If I can plug my podcast real quick.
Yeah, sure.
For those of you guys who are interested in hearing more about Asian theology, the kinds of things that are going on in this part of the world, our podcast is called Mosaic. It's a podcast of Singapore Bible College. So you can look it up online, or you can go to any of the streaming services.
I'll put the link down.
Yeah, Jonas will put the link in the description, but we're always having interesting guests and interesting interviews. So if you want something a little bit more theologically meaty, sometimes it can be a bit complex, but usually very interesting people, interesting stories, subscribe, listen to some of our episodes. And we've been doing it for not quite 2 years, but we're coming up on 2 years soon. So it's been a lot of fun doing that as well.
And if you're Singaporean, or if you ever think about studying theology, hit up Singapore Bible College. Check out the brochure, check out the website, get to know so much more about the lectures. This is just one of them, and there's a lot of interesting lectures in SBC. And thank you for your time, Dr. Justin.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Thanks for watching this episode of this interview. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you.